Episode 5 of Blue Planet 2 is called Green Seas. So this is basically the same as the Seasonal Seas episode from Blue Planet. We deal with kelp forests, seagrass, that kind of thing, more temperate waters. So this episode opens up in, I presume, the far north, where we see that everything's frozen, and when the ice starts to melt, this leads to a boom in activity. All these starfish emerge, they start spawning, which is great food for other animals like sea cucumbers and stuff like that. The imagery of the sea cucumbers feeding by having their arms outstretched and then shoving them into their openings is an image that I didn't really need. Then we move to South Africa, where we see Octopus. So we see Octopus hunting crabs, and that's nothing new, to be honest. I'd seen that before, but it does get a bit more interesting when we see that the octopus is under threat. We see pajama sharks hunting them. So pajama sharks are not a species of shark that I'd heard of before this series, but they seem to be pretty good predators for octopus. And we see that when the shark gets the octopus is very good at defending itself. It shoves its tentacles into the shark's gills so it can't breathe, forcing it to be released. And then when the shark comes back for more, it actually covers itself in shells, confusing the shark. So while the shark can smell it, it can't really see it, and when it does try and bump into it, it's obviously bumping into shells, doesn't really know what it's doing. This gives the octopus some time to escape again. It's a really interesting sequence. It's probably the sequence that stuck with me the most from this episode over the years, and it does a really good job of showing you how intelligent octopus are, because I think when we see octopus normally, we see them hunting things, we basically focus on how kind of intimidating they are. I think we as humans do find octopus quite unsettling to look at, and I think we kind of forget sometimes how intelligent they are. So it's pretty interesting stuff. I thought that was a pretty cool sequence. And then we go to the Pacific Northwest and we see kelp forests. We do spend quite a lot of time in this episode in the same places. I feel like the bulk of it is filmed in the Pacific Northwest of North America and Australia. I don't think we visit too many other places around the world. We see Garibaldi fish. They tend their own little patch within the kelp forest, and they're basically constantly under siege by sea urchins. We do explore how damaging sea urchins are to kelp forests in general. We did touch on this in Blue Planet, how urchins are able to create urchin barrens by just stripping kelp forests. And while we don't talk about how devastating this is, it does lead on to sea otters. We don't see the sea otters doing anything particularly interesting. We just see them swimming around and eating sea urchins, to be honest. You know, looking cute, floating at the surface. It's kind of all we see them do. It's still good to talk about how useful they are, though. I think this episode did a good job of talking about how important a lot of these habitats are. And the fact that sea urchins are so devastating to kelp forests, having predators around like sea otters is essential to maintaining the kelp forests. The actual rafts of the sea otters were quite impressive, just showing you how many there were. I don't think I anticipated how big they are until you kind of pan out and see them. That's quite cool as well. Then we talk about seagrass. Seagrass is also a really important habitat, probably more so than kelp forest, because they're very effective carbon sinks. And we see tiger sharks kind of patrolling the seagrass, and we see that sea turtles are there, they crop a lot of seagrass, and the tiger sharks, they move in, and they will take sick sea turtles, they won't take, healthy ones, but the healthy ones are still spooked with the sharks, so they'll move on. This is another situation where predators are good for the habitat, because the sharks move the turtles along, so the turtles aren't able to spend too much time in any one area, so nothing gets overcropped. That's really good. I think that's a very interesting sequence as well. I do feel like it would have been more interesting had we seen the sharks actually hunting the turtles, but, it was still interesting. The shots of the turtles from above are pretty glorious. Then not too far away, we look at spider crabs. So we see all these spider crabs marching in, and this is pretty chaotic. They're clambering over each other. You don't really know where to look as a viewer, to be honest. There's so many there. And they're not there to mate, they're not there to feed, they're there to molt. Because their shells don't grow, in order for the crabs themselves to grow, they have to actually break out of these shells. And their bodies are quite soft, so this is a perfect time for predators to come. And we see this smooth stingray come in, and this is massive. They do a very, very good job of showing you how big this animal is. It's huge. Compared to the spider crabs, it's enormous. It actually reminded me a lot of the way that the dragons were filmed in Game of Thrones. It was very effective at showing you how scary this is and how devastating it would be for the spider crabs. The spider crabs are very obviously shitting themselves when this thing goes over, and you can see why. I mean, the music as well is quite ominous. And then we see Australian giant cuttlefish. So this sequence is quite cool. We saw cuttlefish obviously in the coral reefs episode, but this is a different kind of footage. They're not hunting anything. Instead, we see them mating. We basically see this one huge male's got this female, but she's not interested, so she kind of lures in this smaller male, who then mimics a female and is able to mate with her. That is something I kind of knew. I think we all kind of knew where that was going, to be honest. I feel like enough animals do this, where I have seen it before, and it's kind of the same thing, just with a different animal, but it's still interesting. They made a really good job of showing you how big they are, especially the small male next to the big male. It was quite effective, so I quite like that as well. Then we see weedy sea dragons, also in Australia, I believe, and we see a male, basically, he's got all the eggs, and he's just feeding. It's cool to see them again. I don't think this was anything miraculous either. I think it was just cool to see weedy sea dragons. They look nice, and he, lays all his eggs. And then when the young are able to hatch, they all just float away. Then we move to mangroves. So mangroves are a habitat that I just like. I don't know why. Again, it's just a habitat I like. Every time I see them, I'm like, oh, it's the mangroves. And we see all the other animals in there. There's a crocodile floating about. And we see that there's loads of fish. They have to get out when the tide comes out. They can't stay in the forest. And then they're prime targets for zebra mantis shrimp. So mantis shrimp, again, really cool. We see that this male is just catching all these fish, and it's for his mate. However, when a better offer comes along, he will just leave her and find another one. It's quite good. It starts off going, they're lifelong partners, but romance is pretty much dead in the ocean. If you get a better offer, you may as well go there. And then we kind of end the episode with the algal bloom at Monterey Bay. Attenborough does say that they're plants. They're not, again, I think I've said this before in another series. They say this a lot of times. They always say that cyanobacteria and algae are floating plants. They're not. They're photosynthetic, but that's where the similarity ends. It just annoys me a little bit. But, I'll get over it. And then we see that this leads to a massive boom in anchovies. And then, of course, all these predators come in. Dolphins, sea lions, birds, the drill. And, of course, the humpback whales come at the end and they eat them all. The footage of the humpback whales, again, while nothing new, is always nice to see. It's really good, especially in HD. And especially at the end, if the humpbacks are just breaching. That's amazing. I mean, the last shot of the humpback whale breaching is among the best in the episode. It's just fantastic. So yeah, that's really cool as well. Then the diaries is all about the people filming the octopus and the shark in South Africa. That was quite good. And the guy, Craig Foster, who was kind of showing them where the behaviour was, he did another documentary called My Octopus Teacher that came out in 2020 on Netflix. And that's very good. Worth checking out. Quite emotional. Surprisingly emotional about an octopus. Yeah, if you haven't seen that, definitely check it out. It's very good. And yeah, it's quite cool. Let's see them film it. It was really interesting. They didn't know what they were getting. And it was quite cool as well. So yeah, this episode is pretty good. It's probably the weakest of the series so far anyway, but it's still pretty good. I think it's a pretty good episode. And yeah, highlights are, it's the octopus and the pajama shark I think is the best bit. The spider crabs and the stingray is also great. Yeah, what did you think of this episode? What were your highlights? Let me know in the comments below. I'll be doing the coast episode next. Feel free to like, comment and subscribe if you want to, or don't if you don't, that's totally fine. I'll see you next week, and goodbye.